My name is Elena Carter, and the day I was supposed to become Mrs. Anderson was the day I learned how easily people could destroy a person's dignity while wearing polite smiles. I stood in my wedding dress inside the grand hall where hundreds of guests had gathered, waiting for a groom who never appeared. The flowers were arranged perfectly, the music was ready, and every detail had been planned for months. But the man who promised to stand beside me disappeared before he ever reached the altar. At first, I thought there had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe something had happened. But then my phone remained silent, and the whispers around me grew louder. My fiancé, Adrian Anderson, had chosen not to come. The man I had defended for years had abandoned me on the most important day of my life. I stood there frozen, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes judging me. But what hurt more than his absence was the realization that somewhere, deep inside, I had expected this day to end badly. I just never wanted to admit it. Adrian had always been different when it came to his childhood friend, Lily. Everyone saw it. Everyone except me. Or maybe I saw it and simply refused to accept the truth. I had spent years convincing myself that loyalty mattered, that the past he shared with her was nothing compared to the future we were building together. I was wrong. Then I heard voices from behind me. Voices that belonged to people I never expected to hear. My greatest rival, Victor Hayes, was standing not far away with his friends. Victor and I had competed against each other since we were teenagers. In business, in academics, in almost everything. We were always trying to prove who was better. To the outside world, we were enemies. But at that moment, I heard something that made me stop breathing. Thank goodness Adrian didn't show up, someone said. Otherwise, I might have actually stolen the bride myself. My entire body went still. I recognized the voice immediately. Victor's voice. Is Adrian completely blind? How could he abandon a woman like her for someone who pretends to be innocent all the time? Another voice continued. If she were mine, I would never let her feel unwanted for even a second. My face heated instantly. I looked toward Victor, expecting to see him speaking. But his lips never moved. He was simply standing there with his usual cold expression. Yet somehow, I could still hear his thoughts. Why is she staring at me? Did she finally realize I'm better looking than Adrian? Took her long enough. I blinked. Confusion replaced my anger. Was I imagining things? Had the humiliation finally broken my mind? I looked away and tried to ignore it. I reached for my dress and prepared to leave, but before I could take a step, Adrian's mother blocked my path. Margaret Anderson had always treated me like a business agreement instead of a person. She looked at me as if I had embarrassed her personally. Where do you think you're going? She asked coldly. The ceremony is about to begin. I laughed quietly because I couldn't believe she was serious. Your son is the one who left. You should ask him where he went. Her expression darkened. Don't make this difficult, Elena. The Anderson family has already suffered enough because of your attitude. My attitude? I repeated. Your son ran away from his own wedding. She stepped closer. You should be grateful. Many women would never receive an opportunity like this. I stared at her in disbelief. The wedding is cancelled. Your family can handle the expenses. My lawyer will contact you. For the first time, I saw anger flash in her eyes. She wasn't used to anyone refusing her. She had expected me to lower my head like everyone else. Instead, she smiled strangely. Who said the wedding is cancelled? I frowned. What are you talking about? She clapped her hands, and one of her assistants brought something into the hall. A rooster. I stared at the animal, completely speechless. Margaret looked proud of herself. According to old traditions, when the groom cannot attend, the bride can complete the ceremony symbolically. This marriage alliance will still be recognized. The room erupted with shocked whispers. My hands curled into fists. You are unbelievable. Watch your words, she snapped. This entire situation happened because you couldn't keep a man interested. If you were more gentle like Lily, Adrian would never have left. That sentence was the final thing I needed to hear. I had spent years being patient, forgiving, and understanding. I had accepted every excuse Adrian gave me. I had ignored every warning sign. But standing there in my wedding dress while his family blamed me for his betrayal, something inside me finally broke. If you're finished humiliating yourself, I suggest you stop before everyone realizes how ridiculous you look. Margaret's face twisted with rage. She grabbed my arm and pushed me toward the altar. I stumbled because the dress was heavy and my emotions were even heavier. For a second, I thought I would fall. Then a strong hand caught me. I looked up. My heart stopped. Victor Hayes. My lifelong rival. The man who had competed with me, challenged me, and annoyed me for years. Careful, he said with a mocking smile. It would be embarrassing if Miss Carter collapsed before she gets her replacement groom. I pulled my hand away immediately. I expected sarcasm. I expected cruelty. But then I heard his thoughts again. She looks incredible. How did Adrian not see what everyone else sees? If she were mine, I would spend every day proving how valuable she is. I stared at him. That couldn't be real. There was no way. Victor noticed my expression. What? He asked sharply. Have you finally realized I'm more attractive than Adrian? I shook my head. Nothing. I had no idea what was happening. Maybe stress had finally affected me. Maybe my mind was creating voices because reality was too painful. I turned away, but before I could escape, another familiar voice stopped me. My stepmother, Clara, walked into the hall with her 2 children beside her. She looked almost satisfied by the disaster unfolding around me. Elena, how long are you going to keep pretending? She said loudly. Everyone knows the truth. The guests immediately became interested. Clara knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted an audience. The Anderson family was generous enough to accept you despite your past. You should be grateful. My chest tightened. I knew what she was referring to. Years ago, I had been kidnapped. I had escaped before anything truly terrible happened, but rumors spread. People twisted the story until my pain became entertainment. Adrian was the one who found me afterward, and because of that, I spent years believing I owed him everything. Clara smiled cruelly. People are talking, Elena. Maybe that's why Adrian finally understood he deserved someone better. The whispers started again. I felt like the entire room was closing in on me. For years, I had carried that memory quietly. I had never wanted pity. I had only wanted to move forward. But now my own family was using it against me. I looked around the room. Everyone was waiting for me to defend myself. To beg. To explain. But suddenly, I realized something. I didn't need to prove my innocence to people who had already decided I was guilty. I needed to change the game completely. My eyes moved toward Victor. The man whose thoughts I could somehow hear. The man who, according to those thoughts, wanted me more than Adrian ever had. I stepped forward and grabbed his sleeve. His expression changed instantly. Victor, I said clearly enough for everyone to hear. Will you marry me? The entire hall went silent. Even Victor looked shocked. I continued before anyone could interrupt. Your company wants the West Harbor project. My company controls the final approval. A marriage between us would create the strongest partnership in the industry. For the first time in my life, I saw Victor Hayes completely speechless. Then I heard his thoughts. She actually asked me. Stay calm. Do not look like you've been waiting for this moment for years. I almost laughed. Almost. Then he looked at me and gave a slow smile. Yes. Two voices answered at the same time. Mine and his. And for the first time that day, I felt like I was no longer the victim of someone else's decision. I was the person making the choice. Victor removed his jacket, revealing a perfectly tailored suit underneath. It was almost as if he had been prepared for this moment. He offered me his arm. Let's go, he said. And together, in front of everyone who expected me to fall apart, I walked toward the altar with my enemy beside me. The moment Victor and I stepped onto the altar, the entire atmosphere changed. Minutes earlier, everyone had been watching me like I was a woman who had been abandoned and defeated. Now they looked confused, shocked, and even afraid. Margaret Anderson's face turned pale with disbelief. She never expected me to replace her son so quickly, and she definitely never expected that replacement to be Victor Hayes. "This is my son's wedding," she shouted. "You can't just bring another man here and pretend nothing happened." Victor didn't even look nervous. He simply turned his head slightly and stared at her with the same calm confidence he always had. "I heard you've been married 3 times, Mrs. Anderson," he said. "You have 3 children with 3 different men. Does that mean you are also something people should throw away?" The entire room went silent. Margaret's expression collapsed. Everyone knew about her complicated past, but no one had ever dared to say it directly to her face. Victor continued in an emotionless tone. "And let's not forget, the Anderson family never truly accepted you. You're only managing a branch office while pretending to be the rightful heir. Maybe you should worry less about insulting others and more about your own position." The whispers that had been aimed at me immediately shifted toward her. For once, Margaret was the person everyone was judging. I looked at Victor differently. This man who had always been my opponent had just defended me without hesitation. But before I could think too much about it, the ceremony began. Everything happened so quickly that it almost felt unreal. One moment I was supposed to marry Adrian. The next moment I was standing beside Victor Hayes. The officiant asked if we accepted each other, and we both answered yes. Then came the final step. The groom may kiss the bride. My heart immediately started racing. Because I knew what Victor was thinking. "Don't panic. Stay composed. You are a respectable businessman. Do not embarrass yourself." I almost smiled. He looked completely serious on the outside, but inside his thoughts were chaotic. She is standing right beside me. She is my wife. Is this really happening? Don't think about kissing her too much. You'll look suspicious. I prepared myself, expecting him to do something reckless. Instead, Victor gently placed his hand on my cheek. Then he lowered his head and kissed his own thumb instead of my lips. I froze. Then I understood. He had done it deliberately. He was respecting me. He knew this marriage had happened because I needed an escape, not because I was ready to suddenly become his wife in every sense. For the first time that day, the tension inside my chest loosened. After the ceremony ended, the chaos returned. My father, Robert Carter, finally arrived. Of course, he was not there because he cared about me. He was there because he cared about appearances. His face was filled with anger. "Elena, what have you done?" he shouted. "Do you realize how much shame you have brought to this family? Changing grooms during your wedding? Do you have any idea what people will say?" I looked at him quietly. For years, I had hoped my father would eventually choose me. But every time, he chose reputation instead. Clara immediately joined him. "Exactly. Victor Hayes is not someone you can control. He's probably only using you. You should have accepted Adrian. At least he was willing to marry you." I almost laughed. "Since you think Adrian is so perfect, why don't you let your precious daughter marry him?" Clara's expression changed instantly. She turned toward my father dramatically. "Did you hear that? After everything I've done for her, this is how she treats me. I ignored her performance. I took out my phone and made a call. Contact the marketing department. End all cooperation with Anderson Corporation immediately. Clara's eyes widened. You can't do that. I looked at her. Why not? Because the company doesn't belong only to you. I smiled slightly. Actually, it does more than you think. Everyone became quiet. I continued. My mother founded Carter International. After her death, I inherited 60% of the shares. I am the majority shareholder. My father's expression changed immediately. He hated when I mentioned my mother because he knew she had built something he could never replace. You always were too aggressive, he said coldly. Just like your mother. A woman should know how to support her family instead of chasing power. I looked at him with disbelief. Even after everything, he still thought he had the right to tell me what kind of woman I should be. Interesting, I said. So according to you, marriage means a woman should give up everything she built? I glanced at Victor. Luckily, my husband doesn't think that way. Clara laughed. Your husband? Don't be ridiculous. Everyone knows Victor has hated you since childhood. He's only pretending. Don't be surprised when you realize he was just using you. Before I could respond, a deep voice came from behind me. My wife is right. I turned around. Victor stood there. His expression was calm, but his eyes were cold. Whatever decision Elena makes, the Hayes Group will support her. Clara immediately stopped smiling. My father looked uncomfortable. Victor placed his hand on my shoulder. You should worry about your own family instead. I heard your daughter has been chasing the Harris heir while pretending they have a relationship. Clara's face turned pale. That's impossible. Victor raised an eyebrow. Is it? I suddenly understood. The people who spent years judging me were not nearly as perfect as they pretended to be. Like mother, like daughter, I said quietly. Both of you are very talented at creating your own stories. My father's anger exploded. He raised his hand. You ungrateful, he didn't finish. I moved faster than he expected. From my purse, I pulled out a small dagger and drove it into the wooden table between us. The sound echoed through the room. Not a threat. Not an attack. Just a warning. Everyone froze. My wedding dress, my carefully styled hair, the flowers still attached to my veil, and a blade stuck into the table in front of my father created a scene nobody would ever forget. I looked directly at him. The next person who tries to hit me, I said calmly, will lose much more than my respect. Victor stepped beside me. Not in front of me. Beside me. I heard his thoughts immediately. My wife just stabbed a table wearing a wedding dress. This is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. Stay calm. Do not smile. You are supposed to look serious. I had to fight the urge to laugh. Out loud, he said in a cold voice, Mr. Carter, raising your hand against my wife in public is a serious mistake. I suggest you consider the consequences carefully. My father lowered his hand slowly. For the first time, he looked uncertain. I removed the dagger, placed it back into my purse, and smiled politely. I think this conversation is over. Victor and I left before anyone could recover. Outside, his driver opened the car door. I sat down in my wedding dress, still trying to process everything that had happened. After a few minutes of silence, Victor looked at me. You carry a dagger. Yes. In your wedding purse? The design is misleading. It has more space than people expect. He stared ahead for a moment. Then I heard his thoughts. She plans for every possibility. She's incredible. Don't say that. You'll sound obsessed. I looked out the window to hide my smile. Why did you agree so quickly? I asked. Victor remained silent for a moment. The West Harbor Project. I raised an eyebrow. Only business? Of course. But his thoughts immediately betrayed him. Because I've wanted this for years. Because when she grabbed my sleeve, she looked like someone who had finally reached her limit. Because I couldn't watch her be humiliated again. I studied his face. Victor Hayes had spent years pretending to be my enemy. But maybe I had never truly understood him. That evening, we sat in one of the Hayes Group apartments overlooking the city. We discussed the rules of our marriage. Separate rooms, I said. Agreed. Publicly, we maintain a professional partnership until we decide otherwise. Agreed. You won't use this marriage to interfere with my company. Victor looked at me seriously. I already said I support your decisions. That won't change. I watched him carefully. You didn't have to defend me today. You needed someone on your side. His answer was simple. I was there. For some reason, that sentence affected me more than all the dramatic words people had said that day. Because Victor didn't ask for gratitude. He didn't ask me to repay him. He simply stood beside me. Then I remembered something. Something that had bothered me for years. Victor, I said slowly. You know something about my kidnapping, don't you? His expression changed immediately. The room became silent. Why do you think that? He asked. Because you called it the kidnapping. Not the rumor. Everyone else calls it a rumor. Victor looked away. Then he finally said, Elena, before I tell you the truth, you need to be ready to hear it. My heart started beating faster. Tell me. He took a deep breath. Adrian Anderson never rescued you. I felt the world stop. What? He arrived after everything was already over. Someone else stopped what happened that night. Someone else protected you. My hands tightened. Who? Victor looked at me. And in that moment, I already knew the answer. It was me. I was unable to speak for several seconds. The room suddenly felt smaller, like all the air had disappeared at once. Victor Hayes, the man I had spent years believing was my enemy, was telling me that the one person I thought had saved my life had never actually been my savior. Adrian had built his entire place in my heart on a lie. Explain, I whispered. Victor remained quiet for a moment, as if he was choosing every word carefully. 12 years ago, when you disappeared, I was nearby. I had heard rumors that something was wrong. I didn't know the entire plan, but I knew enough to understand you were in danger. I stared at him. You were 17. He nodded. Yes. I was just a teenager. I didn't have power or connections like I do now. But I knew I couldn't ignore it. He looked down briefly. I found out where they planned to move you. I made a call. I redirected people who could intervene. By the time Adrian found you, everything had already ended. My mind replayed every memory I had of that night. The fear. The darkness. The moment Adrian appeared afterward and told me I was safe. For 12 years, I had believed that moment defined everything. I had believed I owed him my life. That was why I forgave his coldness. That was why I accepted his distance. That was why I kept trying to make our relationship work even when he barely treated me like someone he loved. I had always thought, he saved me once. I can't abandon him. But now I realized I had been carrying a debt that never existed. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Victor's expression softened slightly. Because you trusted him. That's not an answer. It is. His voice became quieter. If I had appeared after you were rescued and said, Adrian didn't save you, I did, what would it have looked like? I didn't answer. Because I knew. It would have looked like Victor was trying to destroy the person I depended on. It would have looked like jealousy. Like revenge. Like he was stealing credit. And because, he continued, you were finally rebuilding your life. You believed someone had protected you. I didn't want to take that away from you without proof. I looked at him for a long time. You really are terrible at being my enemy. A faint smile appeared on his face. You're only realizing that now? For the first time, I didn't see Victor Hayes as my rival. I saw the boy who had helped me when no one else knew I needed help. The boy who had protected me and then disappeared without asking for recognition. Meanwhile, the man I had defended for years had collected praise for something he never did. 3 days later, Adrian came to see me. I was in the Carter International headquarters, sitting in the middle of a board meeting I had personally called. My assistant informed me that Adrian was waiting downstairs. I finished the meeting before leaving. I wanted him to understand something. He was no longer important enough to interrupt my life. When I entered the lobby, I saw him immediately. Adrian looked exhausted. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, and his confident expression was gone. The moment he saw me, his face changed. Elena, I stopped a few feet away. Adrian. His eyes moved behind me and landed on Victor, who had followed me downstairs. His jaw tightened. This wedding was supposed to be ours. I looked at him calmly. Then you should have shown up. His face fell. I made a mistake. I almost laughed. A mistake? Leaving me standing alone in front of hundreds of guests was a mistake? Destroying years of trust was a mistake? Lily needed me, he said quietly. There it was. The same excuse he always used. Lily needed him. Lily was innocent. Lily was special. I thought she was in trouble, he continued. I couldn't ignore her. I stared at him. Adrian, I need to ask you something. He looked confused. What? The kidnapping. His expression immediately changed. What about it? Did you really save me? Silence. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. His hesitation told me everything. I found you, he finally said. But he didn't say yes. He couldn't. Because he knew the truth. Did you save me? I asked again. His lips parted, but no words came out. And that silence destroyed the last piece of respect I had for him. You never saved me, I said. You just arrived after everything was over and accepted the gratitude. Elena, that's not fair, fair? I interrupted. I spent 12 years believing I owed you my life. 12 years forgiving everything because I thought you gave me something I could never repay. My voice remained calm. Somehow, that made it worse. You weren't my hero, Adrian. You were just someone who benefited from a lie. His face became pale. I loved you. No, I shook my head. You loved being needed. He stepped toward me. Please. I moved back before he could reach me. Talk to your lawyers. You'll need them. I walked away without looking back. The next battle was not emotional. It was business. The board meeting I had organized was only the beginning. I presented official documents proving my ownership of 60% of Carter International. Then I requested a complete financial investigation into years of suspicious activity. My father, Richard Carter, tried to object immediately. You're destroying your own family, he said. I looked at him. No. I'm finally protecting it. Victor sat quietly beside me, along with several Hayes Group advisors. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone changed the atmosphere. Everyone knew I was no longer standing alone. The audit began the next morning. And I wasn't surprised by what they found. I had spent years watching the company's records. I knew something was wrong. I just never had enough evidence to act. Money had been transferred into my stepmother Clara's personal accounts through fake consulting companies. Business resources had been secretly redirected to benefit my stepbrother's projects. Documents had been prepared to transfer my mother's shares to my father without her approval. The worst discovery was the original share transfer agreement. It had my mother's name on it. But my mother was already dead when the document was supposedly signed. It was a forgery. Clara had created it. When investigators confronted my father, he immediately tried to deny everything. I didn't know about this. But the evidence was stronger than his excuses. Emails showed he had discussed the timeline. Financial records connected him to the transfers. For years, they had planned to take what my mother built. They believed I was too emotional, too young, too distracted by love to notice. They were wrong. The investigation into my kidnapping revealed even more. Clara had not only helped destroy my company. She had been connected to the event that changed my life forever. The payment records showed that she had hired people through an intermediary. The same people who took me all those years ago. The truth hit harder than any betrayal I had experienced before. The woman who acted like my mother had been the reason I lived with fear for 12 years. When investigators brought Clara into questioning, she tried to blame my father. When my father realized she was turning against him, he tried to blame her. They had spent years pretending to be a family while secretly destroying each other. The Johnson family also became involved. Margaret Anderson had known the kidnapping story was suspicious. She knew Adrian wasn't the hero he claimed to be. But she stayed silent because the lie benefited her family's alliance with mine. Everyone had gained something from my pain. Everyone except me. The final piece came during a charity event 2 weeks later. A large screen in the hall displayed footage from my wedding. I had submitted the recording myself. Everyone expected a normal celebration video. Instead, they watched Margaret forcing me into humiliation. They saw the rooster. They heard every cruel word she said about me. They watched her reveal exactly who she was when she thought she had power. The room became silent. Then the whispers started. Margaret's reputation collapsed in a single night. She had spent years judging others while hiding her own secrets. And now everyone finally saw the truth. Standing beside Victor, watching everything fall apart, I realized something. Revenge was never about destroying them. It was about taking back everything they stole from me. My name. My company. My confidence. My future. And most importantly, the belief that I needed someone else to save me. Because the truth was simple. I had survived before. I had fought before. And now, I was finally free. The weeks that followed felt like watching a storm finally pass after years of dark clouds. Everything that had been hidden behind perfect smiles and carefully prepared lies was exposed. The Anderson family collapsed almost overnight. Margaret Anderson, who had once stood in the middle of my wedding hall and treated my humiliation like entertainment, became the subject of endless criticism. The video from my wedding spread throughout the business world. People saw her forcing me into a ridiculous ceremony with a rooster. They heard the insults. They heard her calling me damaged and unworthy. The same people who had whispered about me for years were now whispering about her. For the first time, Margaret understood what it felt like to lose control of the story. Adrian tried to repair his reputation, but there was nothing left to repair. He released statements claiming he had been misunderstood. He said he had made a difficult choice because he wanted to help someone who needed him. But no one believed him anymore. Especially not me. The truth about the kidnapping had completely destroyed the image he had built. He had spent 12 years accepting praise for something Victor had done. Worse, he had used that lie to make me feel permanently indebted to him. I had mistaken guilt for love. I had mistaken gratitude for loyalty. And I had spent years protecting a man who was only protecting his own image. The investigation into my family continued. Clara's involvement was confirmed through financial records, communication history, and testimony from the intermediary she had used. She had planned everything carefully, but she had made one mistake. She underestimated me. She thought I was still the same girl who cried silently after being hurt. She thought I would keep forgiving people because I was afraid of losing them. But the woman who stood before the investigators was not that girl anymore. My father tried to save himself by blaming Clara. He claimed he knew nothing about the forged documents or the stolen funds. But the evidence proved otherwise. Messages between him and Clara showed that they had discussed how to transfer control of Carter International. They had waited for the perfect moment to take everything my mother built. They never imagined I would fight back. They never imagined Victor would stand beside me. And they definitely never imagined the person they considered my enemy would become the person who helped reveal the truth. A few months later, the court proceedings began. I attended every hearing. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted to watch them suffer. I attended because I refused to hide from the past they created for me. Clara received the longest sentence. The charges included kidnapping, conspiracy, fraud, forgery, financial crimes, and destruction of evidence. When the judge announced her sentence, she looked toward me. For a brief moment, I saw something that almost looked like regret. But it disappeared quickly. People like Clara rarely regretted hurting others. They only regretted getting caught. My father faced punishment for his role in the scheme. He had spent years believing that being my father gave him the right to control me. He believed my success belonged to him because he was connected to me. But in the end, he lost everything because he never understood one thing. A person's loyalty cannot be demanded. It must be earned. Margaret Anderson's sentence came after that. Her crimes were not as severe as Clara's, but she had participated in the cover-up and helped maintain the false story that destroyed my reputation. She had used my pain as a business strategy. She had treated my life like a negotiation. Now she had to face the consequences. Adrian's case was the hardest for me emotionally, not because I loved him anymore, but because I was finally accepting that the person I loved had never truly existed. The man I remembered was built from my own hopes. The court found that he had deliberately allowed false information about the kidnapping to continue because it benefited his relationship with my family. He had used the story to strengthen the marriage alliance and secure his position. The person I once believed saved me had actually been one of the people who trapped me. When the judge announced his sentence, Adrian looked at me. His eyes were full of regret. Maybe he finally understood what he had lost. But regret came too late. I had spent years waiting for him to choose me. Now I was finally choosing myself. Rose, Adrian's childhood friend, was also exposed. She had tried to present herself as innocent, but records showed she knew more than she admitted. She had helped destroy evidence and had participated in the plan to maintain the lies surrounding our families. Her perfect innocent image disappeared completely. After the trials ended, I returned to Carter International. Walking through the building that my mother had created felt different. For years, I had felt like I was only protecting her legacy. But now I realized I was also creating my own. I sat in my mother's old office, looking at the desk where she had made countless decisions. She had built everything when people told her she couldn't. She had faced the same kind of judgment I had faced. Maybe that was why she had left me the majority of her shares. Maybe she knew I would need them one day. Victor found me there later that afternoon. He knocked on the open door before entering. He always did that. Even when he didn't need permission. Somehow, that small habit told me everything about him. "You came early today," he said. I smiled slightly. I was thinking about my mother. Victor nodded. He didn't try to give me advice. He didn't try to make the moment about himself. He simply stood there with me. That was what made him different. Adrian always wanted to be seen as the person who saved me. Victor never asked for recognition. He just protected me. After a while, I looked at him. You know what I find strange? I asked. What? For years, I thought you were the person who disliked me the most. He raised an eyebrow. And now? I smiled. Now I think you were the only person who actually saw me. He became quiet. For once, Victor Hayes had no clever response. I walked closer. You know, I married you because I needed an escape. He looked at me carefully. I know. I thought I was using you to burn my bridges. He nodded. And now? I looked around the office. At everything I had reclaimed. At everything I had rebuilt. Now I think I found someone who never tried to own what was mine. Victor's expression changed slightly. He had always been confident, always controlled. But at that moment, he looked almost uncertain. Elena, I don't want the contract anymore, I said. The rules we created. Separate rooms. A marriage based on strategy. I don't want that anymore. For several seconds, he didn't move. Then he asked quietly, what do you want instead? I smiled. Something real. The silence between us felt different. Not uncomfortable. Not empty. It felt like the beginning of something. Victor stepped closer. Can I kiss you properly this time? I remembered our wedding day. The way he had kissed his thumb instead of forcing a moment I wasn't ready for. At the time, I thought it was strange. Now I understood. It had been respect. The kind of respect I had spent years searching for. Yes, I whispered. This time, his lips touched mine. Not as part of a business agreement. Not as a performance. Not as a way to prove anything. Just because we both wanted it. 3 weeks later, the Hayes Group and Carter International officially announced their partnership for the West Harbor project. Reporters immediately asked about our marriage and whether it created a conflict of interest. Victor simply answered, my wife is her own force. She does not need me to define her. Everyone laughed, but I understood the meaning behind his words. He didn't see me as someone who needed protection. He saw me as someone worth standing beside. Months later, I was sitting in our apartment reviewing company reports when Victor placed a small box on the table. I opened it and froze. Inside were earrings. My mother's design. The same style she used to wear in old photographs. How did you find these? I asked. Victor shrugged. Research. That was his answer for everything. But I knew him better now. I knew how much effort he had put into finding them. I knew he remembered small things I had mentioned years ago without even realizing it. I put the earrings on, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw my mother's strength reflected back at me. Victor looked at me for a moment, then quickly looked away. I heard his thoughts. She's wearing them. She looks beautiful. Don't say anything embarrassing. Act normal. I smiled. The man who had spent 12 years pretending to be my enemy was still terrible at hiding what he felt. But maybe that was what I loved most about him. He never pretended to be perfect. He never pretended to be my hero. He simply chose me. Michael once took credit for saving my life. Victor never asked for credit at all. And that was exactly why, when the truth finally came out, I knew who deserved my heart. I didn't choose the man who wanted to be remembered as my savior. I chose the man who protected me even when I hated him. I chose the man who stood beside me when everyone else tried to push me down. I chose myself first. And then I chose him. Because sometimes the person you believe is your enemy is actually the only person who was fighting for you all along. And sometimes the greatest revenge is not watching your enemies fall. It is standing tall after everything they tried to take from you. My story was never about being rescued. It was about realizing I had always been strong enough to survive. The boats were burned behind me. The old life was gone. And the future ahead of me finally belonged to me.